When I mounted the mirror on my backyard fence, I never imagined it would trigger a full-blown neighborhood war. It wasn't ostentatious, just a weathered antique piece with a faded oak frame and slightly tarnished edges, the kind of mirror that caught more sunlight than it gave back. It had belonged to my grandmother, who used to hang it in her garden to reflect good energy. After she passed, I kept it boxed for years. But with spring arriving and the backyard finally blooming, it felt like the right time. I should have known Karen Mitchell would find a problem with it. Karen was the self-appointed queen of our suburban kingdom. Though her title was officially HOA president, she behaved more like a monarch, one who monitored every porch light, every flower bed, every noise after 9 p.m. Her white SUV patrolled the neighborhood with all the subtlety of a tank. You could always spot her. Oversized sunglasses, pastel cardigans, and a clipboard like it was a weapon of war. I'd lived in Rosemeadow Heights for 2 years and kept to myself. I wasn't interested in power plays or neighborhood gossip. My work-from-home job gave me flexibility but not much interaction. Karen had tried to rope me into her community women's council meetings once or twice, but I politely declined. I wasn't her kind of resident. No kids, no HOA fundraisers, no pretentious wine nights. The morning after I hung the mirror, I found a thick envelope stuck between the slats of my fence. The HOA logo glared at me like a warning label. Notice of violation. You are in breach of Rule 12B. Unauthorized reflective objects. A $500 fine has been applied to your account. You have 7 days to remove the mirror or face further disciplinary action. I stared at the letter, confused. I knew those bylaws. I had read them when I moved in. Rule 12B wasn't listed. There were plenty of restrictions. Trash cans visibility, lawn height, garage door colors, but nothing about mirrors. That's when I realized. Karen had made it up. I marched to the HOA office, which was, conveniently, a converted room off Karen's garage. The front lawn was a sculpted battlefield of white gravel and trimmed boxwoods. No blade of grass dared to grow out of line. Karen was on the front porch, sipping something from a glass that definitely wasn't water. "Karen," I said, holding up the letter. "Can we talk about this?" She lowered her sunglasses just enough to glare over the rim. "Everything you need is in the notice. Rule 12B doesn't exist." "It does now," she replied coolly. "We updated the bylaws during last month's emergency board meeting. I never got a notice about any meeting. We posted it online. You should check your emails." "I do." There was nothing. Karen sighed like she was dealing with a particularly slow child. "If you don't attend meetings, you forfeit your right to participate. That's in the charter." "I want to see the updated bylaws," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "You can submit a formal request. It'll be reviewed at the next board session." "When's that?" 2 months from now." And just like that, the conversation was over. She turned her back and shut the door behind her, the faint click of the deadbolt echoing louder than it should have. I stood on her porch, seething. At first, I considered just taking the mirror down. It wasn't worth the fight, right? But something about the smug tilt of her voice, the manufactured rule, the weaponized bureaucracy, no. I wasn't going to bend. I appealed the fine in writing. 3 days later, I received a denial and signed. The next day, I received a second citation for unauthorized garden ornaments. It referred to a bird-shaped wind chime hanging from a tree branch. I'd had it up for months. The day after that, another trash bin visibility violation. My bins were behind a wooden screen, same place they'd always been. Karen had made up her mind. I was the new target. I started noticing her SUV driving by my home more frequently, slowing down when it passed. One morning I caught her standing just outside my property line, staring directly at the mirror like it had personally insulted her. To her, the mirror was an affront. It didn't just reflect light. It reflected a lack of control, her control. It was something she hadn't approved, couldn't regulate, hadn't foreseen. I tried to talk to a few neighbors about it. Most of them gave me awkward smiles and backed away. A few admitted, off the record, that they'd been fined for similar violations, but didn't want to stir up trouble. Karen's power rested not in the bylaws but in intimidation. She'd become the law because no one dared challenge her. But I wasn't going to play along. I took photos of everything: the mirror, the citations, my emails, the bylaws from the day I moved in. I started keeping notes. I made copies of every letter and documented every strange drive-by. Because if Karen wanted a war over a mirror, she was going to get one. And I intended to win. By the end of that week, I had received 3 more fines. But I hadn't moved the mirror. And I had no intention of backing down. I once believed that homeowners associations were meant to build community, trim hedges, fund streetlights, keep things orderly. But under Karen's rule, Rosemeadow Heights had turned into something else entirely. A silent neighborhood where everyone smiled, waved, and quietly feared the next envelope on their doorstep. After refusing to remove the mirror, my mailbox became a daily ritual of dread. The letters came in plain white envelopes, stamped with the HOA seal like a threat wrapped in civility. Violation notice. Warning. Final notice before further action. My record now included infractions for wind chimes, an excessively decorative mailbox, and a non-uniform lawn ornament. A garden gnome that had been there since the day I moved in. The fines stacked up. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was manufacturing them. Her power didn't come from any rulebook. Came from fear. I stopped trimming the rose bush that edged the driveway. What was the point? It would be cited next. But in the quiet hours when the emails were done and the day slowed down, I sat by my window and watched. Karen passed my house twice each day, sometimes 3. Always driving slowly, sometimes stopping. Her face expressionless behind the windshield. She wanted compliance, not peace. And yet, amid the noise, the mirror stayed. Still hanging on the back fence, still catching sunlight, still reflecting the wild sways of the trees behind it. It had become more than decoration now. It was defiance. Symbol. I decided to talk to one of the old-timers. Mr. Ellison had lived 3 doors down for over 20 years. His porch was always swept. His hedges geometrically perfect. If anyone understood Karen's rise to power, it would be him. He invited me in with a weary smile. His living room smelled faintly of peppermint and newspaper. She started small, he told me, offering tea. Fixing sidewalks, trimming overgrowth, stuff no one wanted to argue with. But she kept pushing. She's got this knack for finding weaknesses. Someone's kid breaks a window. She helps cover it. Then suddenly they're backing her votes. Someone forgets to pay dues. She gives a warning instead of a fine, if they join a committee. She built loyalty like a spider builds a web. And no one said anything. Plenty did. First. But the complaints never made it to meetings. Or they were lost. After a while, people stopped trying. I asked about the board. All her people now. She pushed the old board out years ago. Said they were ineffective. Most just quit. Tired of the drama. I left Mr. Ellison's house with more questions than answers, and a burning certainty that something was deeply wrong. That night, I took a flashlight and scanned the area around my mailbox. Sure enough, a small security camera blinked from Karen's flowerbed across the street, camouflaged among ornamental grass. Tiny red light, barely visible. Recording. Always watching. I started documenting everything. Fine. Drive-by. Each moment Karen stepped outside her jurisdiction. I organized it all in a folder on my desktop labeled HOA. Operation Tyrant. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet. But I needed proof. Evidence. Something more than outrage. A week later, the escalation hit a new level. A letter arrived. This one not from the HOA, but from a lawyer's office Karen had clearly retained. It claimed I was in active defiance of established community policy, and that continued non-compliance would lead to a lien on my property. They cited a clause about unpaid fines and the HOA's right to pursue collection. My hands trembled as I read it. This wasn't petty anymore. It was financial warfare. I had always paid my dues on time, maintained my yard, followed the guidelines. But the mirror, the single harmless mirror, had now become a debt generator. $500 became $800. Then $1,200. Every week brought new fees, late penalties, administrative costs. The total climbed to nearly $3,000. My stomach twisted at the thought of losing my home over this. But I didn't panic. Got smart. I dug out the HOA bylaw book I'd received when I moved in and compared it page by page to the new one Karen had posted online. There were changes, subtle ones. Clauses shifted, numbering altered, vague language inserted. Rules about personal expression. Guidelines for visual cohesion. And most notably, Rule 12B. It had no author, no date stamp, no vote record. Karen had rewritten the bylaws. Quietly, unofficially, and without proper board approval. That was my opening. I printed everything. Cross-referenced the county records. Tracked down former board members through social media. A retired teacher named Eileen, a small business owner named Chris, and a widower named Ramon. All had the same story. Karen had suggested they resign. When they resisted, violations started appearing on their records. One even mentioned his tires were mysteriously slashed a week after he voted against her. She plays dirty, Chris said over the phone. But no one ever fights back. I'm not afraid of her, I replied. You should be. The next day I noticed something strange. My mirror, it had been moved. Not taken, not broken. Just shifted slightly, tilted downward as if someone had tried to detach it and then stopped. I checked the camera feed from the night before, but the footage was missing, corrupted. It had never happened before. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about bylaws or petty power. Karen wanted total control. Over appearances, over information, over people. But I had something she didn't know I possessed. Proof. And I was going to use it. By now, my backyard had become the quiet heart of a storm. The mirror, still intact and gleaming in the morning sun, was no longer just decoration. It was a silent protest, a lightning rod, a statement that one resident in Rosemeadow Heights would not bow to Karen Mitchell's tyranny. I stopped waiting for the next violation notice. They came daily, sometimes in duplicates. One accused me of failing to maintain visual harmony with the neighborhood. Another cited the sound of my wind chimes as a disturbance to wildlife. I laughed bitterly at that one. Karen had artificial turf in her backyard. There wasn't a bird in sight near her home. But it wasn't funny for long. The real blow came a week later when a certified letter arrived from the county records office. A lien had been filed on my property. It was official. Karen had followed through on her threat. Despite the shaky legality, she had wielded her power well. She'd used the HOA's broken system like a weapon, and now my home, my sanctuary, was on the line. It was time to fight back. Not with words. Not with appeals. With exposure. I gathered my digital war chest. A side-by-side comparison of the original and altered HOA bylaws. Statements from 3 former board members who claimed their resignations were coerced. Photographs of Karen's unapproved property modifications, like the illegal side gate she'd installed without a permit. Screen recordings of her deleted HOA meeting minutes and shady changes to online records. Most damning of all, a video clip from a neighbor's camera that showed Karen stepping into my backyard at night with a pair of bolt cutters, right before my mirror had been mysteriously tilted. I compiled it all into a polished presentation. A narrator friend of mine from college lent me her voice for the video. Calm, clear, and confident, her narration turned the mess into a story. A story about a homeowner wrongfully harassed. About a community under quiet siege. About one woman's unchecked authority. I posted it anonymously on YouTube and then shared the link in the Rosemeadow Heights Facebook group under the username Fairneighbor. No commentary, no signature. Just the title. The HOA president is out of control, and here's the proof. By the next morning, the post had over 500 views. By noon, it was over 3,000. Karen's house, usually silent except for the occasional purr of her SUV, became a flurry of movement. Cars came and went. One neighbor whispered that she'd called an emergency board meeting. Another claimed she was threatening defamation lawsuits. But the damage had been done. People began talking. Really talking. Stories poured into the Facebook group like water through a broken dam. A young mother said Karen had cited her for improper stroller storage on her porch. A retiree had been threatened with eviction over a hummingbird feeder. Someone else mentioned a suspicious HOA landscaping contract awarded to a company run by Karen's cousin. Neighbors who'd been too afraid to speak out were now emboldened by the simple fact that someone else had gone first. Then came the letter that changed everything. An envelope with no HOA stamp, no return address. Just my name. Inside a single sheet of paper. Meet me at the tennis court 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone. I have something you'll want to see. Friend. First I thought it was a prank. But something about the handwriting. It was steady, deliberate. Familiar. I went. The tennis courts were at the far end of the neighborhood, tucked behind a row of thick pine trees. They hadn't been used in years. The bulbs above the court flickered dimly, casting long shadows on the cracked asphalt. He was already there, Mr. Ellison. He looked older in the floodlight's glare, but his posture was firm. I didn't want to say too much before, he began, but there's something you need to see. From his jacket, he pulled out a stack of papers. Meeting minutes from the HOA 3 years ago. Actual typed official records. Not the redacted versions Karen kept online. She never destroyed all of them, he said. I kept copies when I was secretary. Figured someday they might be useful. I flipped through them quickly. There it was, in black and white. The real bylaw logs including voting records. No mention of Rule 12b. And more importantly, no authorization to add or enforce it. Karen had been falsifying records for years. You can take them, Mr. Ellison said. Use them however you need. I nodded, unsure how to thank him. He simply patted my shoulder and disappeared into the shadows. The next morning I emailed everything. My video, the original documents, the witness statements, to a local news outlet known for digging into suburban corruption. Then I sent a copy to the County Homeowners Oversight Committee. 2 days later, the HOA's website went offline. By the end of the week, the Oversight Committee posted an official statement. An investigation had been launched into the HOA leadership of Rosemeadow Heights. Karen didn't leave her house for 3 days. The silence in the neighborhood felt different now. Not fearful but expectant. Like the air before a long overdue storm. And through it all, the mirror remained on my fence, catching the rising sun, reflecting the image of a neighborhood finally waking up. Karen Mitchell was no longer queen of Rosemeadow Heights. Her rule, built on technicalities, fear, and a mountain of fraudulent paperwork, had finally buckled under the weight of truth. The Oversight Committee had moved quickly. In less than a week, an independent audit of HOA documents was underway, led by 2 state-appointed legal investigators. Their arrival had turned the quiet suburban community into something of a spectacle. Neighbors peered through windows, watched from porches, and whispered from behind hedges. Everyone was waiting. Karen, for once, was silent. She hadn't attended the last 2 HOA board meetings, and that silence echoed louder than any tantrum she'd thrown before. Her once intimidating SUV sat unused in her driveway. Her lawn, usually trimmed within an inch of its life, began to look unkempt. That perfectly symmetrical rose bush, her pride and joy, wilted in the spring heat. Meanwhile, the mirror in my backyard stayed exactly where it was, catching the sunlight like a badge of honor. No new citations came. The fines stopped. And for the first time since I moved in, I could step outside and breathe without the invisible weight of surveillance. The day of the public hearing arrived like thunder. The HOA had been ordered to host it in the neighborhood's community center, one of the few structures funded by dues but rarely used for anything other than holiday potlucks. Folding chairs lined the room. Every seat was taken, and many more stood along the walls. Karen arrived 10 minutes late. She wore a beige pantsuit, her uniform of choice, but it didn't have the same power anymore. There were bags under her eyes, her posture stooped. When she stepped up to the podium, a few gasps rippled through the crowd. This was not the woman they remembered. Commanding, loud, immovable. She looked like someone who'd been caught in her own trap. The Oversight Committee chairwoman, a no-nonsense former prosecutor named Alma Reyes, opened the hearing with precision. Today, we address multiple claims of abuse of power, document forgery, financial misappropriation, and violations of HOA governance under State Statute 423.7b, she said. Karen cleared her throat, attempting to regain footing. This is clearly a misunderstanding. Any changes I made were in the best interests of the community. Alma raised a hand. Mrs. Mitchell, please limit responses to the questions asked. We are here for facts, not feelings. The next hour was brutal. The investigators unveiled emails showing Karen rewriting bylaws without quorum. They exposed altered digital records. They revealed that nearly $18,000 in HOA funds had been funneled into a landscaping business owned by her nephew. Then came the testimonials. Neighbors sharing their stories of intimidation, retaliation, and inexplicable fines. And then it was my turn. I stood at the front, holding a printout of the photo of Karen trespassing in my backyard with bolt cutters. The moment I placed it on the projector, a gasp swept through the room. This is the president of our HOA, I said, voice steady. Caught red-handed, not just enforcing fake rules, but breaking actual laws. Karen opened her mouth, but Alma spoke first. Thank you, Mr. Nash. That will be enough. The hearing ended with a unanimous vote of no confidence. Karen Mitchell was formally removed from her position. But that wasn't the end of it. A month later, a civil suit was filed against her by the neighborhood association, not just to recover the stolen funds, but to hold her accountable for years of abuse. The state initiated a separate investigation into potential criminal charges. Her house went on the market 2 weeks later. Motivated seller, the listing read. The community changed almost overnight. The interim board, led by Mr. Ellison and a few new faces, promised transparency and fairness. The bylaw Karen had invented, Rule 12b, was officially struck down, along with a dozen others that were never properly ratified. Neighbors began talking to each other again, not just in whispers but openly. Cookouts returned. Kids played freely on sidewalks that had once been battlegrounds for noise violations. Felt like a real neighborhood again. As for me, I kept the mirror up. Not out of spite anymore, but pride. It was a symbol of resilience. A reflection of what happens when one voice dares to stand against a tyrant pretending to act in the name of community. One afternoon I found a small package on my porch. Inside was a folded note and a piece of polished glass, not unlike the mirror I'd installed. The note read, "You made us brave. Thought you should have this. A grateful neighbor." I smiled and added it to my front window, angled just so it caught the light. Sometimes people still ask me why I put up that mirror in the first place. Was it aesthetic? Feng shui? Some philosophical statement? The truth is, it started as a simple home improvement project. A way to bring a little more light into a shaded corner of my yard. But what it became was something more. A silent protest. Challenge. A mirror held up not to myself, but to power. Because when people like Karen stare into their own reflection, unfiltered, unedited, they can't always handle what they see. And that's when they fall.